Hello friends, this is the D-Min video on science and play for Carrie Perry's protocol. It is the Doctor of Ministry program on playfulness and Eucharist. And so we come to what I have found to be the most exciting discoveries for me in this work that I have been undertaking for the last couple of years, thinking about play. I've always known and felt that play was important physically and spiritually all of my life, but I never really had the words to tell people why. I studied theater in my undergrad degree, and so as a drama major and a youth minister, you can probably see how playful practice and theology might have been an asset in these environments. But what I began to discover is that adults crave play and thrive in environments of play, even when they engage in those activities reluctantly. I had the privilege of working with youth leaders through the Five Oaks Youth Leader Training Program and through my presbytery works in Northern Waters Presbytery with Toronto Conference as well. And it was a profoundly moving and connecting experience to see adults learn to play again for themselves and with others, and to see the importance of making space for it in their faith formation practices. And so with the help of medical doctors, psychiatrists and anthropologists and theologians, I am beginning to find those words. A CBC documentary on play reminds us that play is serious business and that play is present in life as often as sleep and dreams. We just need to start looking for it. And so let's start with Stuart Brown. Stuart Brown was the first scholar to stir my imagination about this project. Brown argues that play has the ability to shape our brains, open imagination, and invigorate the soul. He calls play the single most significant factor in determining our success and our happiness. And his book is a persuasive argument that play is not a remnant of childhood to be outgrown and discarded, but a lifelong necessity for keeping our brains supple and our relationships vital. He speaks of play as a biological state, which has been really helpful for me. You see, play as a biological state is a concept that can resonate through all aspects of the work that I'm doing: liturgy, theology, and science. It bridges the idea of play as an activity that is essential to human health and well-being with the idea of playfulness as an attitude that we need to embrace in ministry. As a biological state of being, play takes a person out of themselves, is not associated with anxiety, brings pleasure, and brings meaning. This biological approach to play by Brown allows us to point to the theological dimensions of play through its spiritual, mystical, transcendent, liminal, and meaning-making characters. This connection from science and biology to theology is provocative and insightful as we start to explore play more fully. What do we mean by play, and why play? Well, these are really hard questions to answer, and so we're going to approach this concept through what's known as a thick description, piling up evidence, each upon the other, and stacking them up and surrounding the concept until we begin to understand it a little bit better. So we will use biology and anthropology and theology to open us up to the importance of play for human beings in general and as spiritual people in particular. The universality and diversity of play as a human practice makes it difficult to give a simple summary and definition of play, because play is an activity that crosses all cultures and all species, and because we all play differently. What is playful to me might seem like the worst thing to someone else, and vice versa. The very universality of play is one of the reasons that Brown names it as essential. He says that if play were not somehow essential to human beings and other creatures, that evolution would have eliminated it by now. And while there is some truth to the idea that animals play as a rehearsal for survival, such as dogs or kittens play fighting and pouncing, it doesn't hold up as the sole rationale for playful behavior. Stuart Brown is a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, and he is the founder of the National Institute for Play in the United States. He says that play is a primal activity and it is the essence of freedom. He says that how we play, the form of play, the things or activities that we do as play, vary tremendously over the course of our lifetimes, but that our state of play is something that stays the same over time, which is why you were asked to take your play history and to look at your play personality. His research indicates that play is as basic a natural phenomenon as sleep, and that many of us, just like sleep, are not getting enough of it. This lack of play has repercussions for us in all areas of life, socially and physically, mentally and spiritually. He has found through his research that a life devoid of play faces major health risks such as depression, a decreased immune system, and stress-related diseases. I find it interesting in a world where adults play very little or pay others to play for them, that depression and anxiety are on the increase. On a larger scale, a culture devoid of play may even experience higher rates of interpersonal violence and crime. By incorporating more play into our lives, Brown argues, we're able to replace these health and societal risks with a greater sense of well-being for ourselves and for our communities. Brown also finds a strong connection between the practice of play and the emotional and cognitive development of the brain. The Power of Play, a documentary on CBC. I sent you a link for you to look at. It's not required for you to watch that program. It is a little bit long, but it might be something that is of interest to you. In that documentary, they suggest that there is more to play than exercise for our body. They discover and reveal through particular research with animals mostly that play is also exercise for the brain. This means that while engaging in play improves your physical and emotional health and well-being, it can also reinforce patterns in your brain and optimize learning processes. From the brain's point of view, play, like sleep, is experienced as a physiologic necessity, just as basic as something like taking a drink to slake our thirst. Play is a necessity in brain development and engagement. So it stands to reason that if it is so important for our brains, that it just somehow might make us smarter. And this is true. The amount of time we spend in play has a direct correlation to the size of the brain's frontal cortex and cerebellum. And those are the areas of the brain that are responsible for cognition, which allows us to determine what information is relevant, how to organize and monitor our thoughts and feelings, and how to plan for the future. Stewart draws the conclusion that play activity actually sculpts the brain. It creates new neural centers and changes the physical format of our brains, allowing the brain to recreate itself by allowing new neural connections to be made between neurons and disparate brain centers. A lack of play, Brown believes, a deficit of play in our lives, causes us to lose our ability to feel pleasure and leads us to an increasing pessimism about life in general. He speaks of how play enables human beings to achieve what he calls the good life, in which we live in accord with our true selves and in harmony with our world. He suggests that when we play, and play well, it affects all areas of life and invigorates the soul. And he references some Hindu teachings, Leela, a tradition in Hindu religion, that is a way of describing all reality, including the cosmos, as the outcome of creative play by the divine absolute. Brown finds hope in a world where there is such atrocity because he sees play as a means for adaptation and survival. And this is possible because play allows and increases creativity and innovation, and it allows us, through those things, to be able to change behavior. He says that play fosters trust, empathy, caring, and sharing. It allows us to feel another's pain or distress, all of which are essential in living out the ministry to which we have been called. And he says that when we are deprived of play, our behaviors and our attitudes become rigid and fixed. One of the simplest and most effective ways of playing is to move. Movement play actually lights up the brain, fostering learning, innovation, flexibility, adaptability, and resilience. Active play stimulates the brain in the amygdala, that portion of the brain where emotions get processed. And it also affects the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and that's the place where executive decisions are processed. There are a number of benefits to play, and Brown identifies these as some: trust, empathy, optimism, flexibility, attunement, problem solving, joy in movement, three-dimensional thinking, perseverance, increased mastery, emotional regulation and resiliency, exploration of the possible, imagination, openness to receive inspired aha moments, cognitive growth, innovativeness, flexibility, and belonging, which leads to a basis of community, cooperation, and altruism. He's not alone in thinking that these are benefits of play, and big benefits of play if you think about it. Jaakko Hamann, a theologian, identifies the benefits of play in this way. He says that play leads to improved problem-solving skills. It meets needs such as letting go, taking risks, exerting control, and being connected. It helps us see the importance of setting boundaries and engaging others. It helps us to love art and culture. It rejuvenates the mind. It manages destructiveness. It improves health, and it strengthens our immune systems. I think one of the most fascinating aspects of Brown's work for me is the suggestion that when we stop playing, we begin the process toward death. If we stop playing, our behaviors become fixed. We lose interest in innovation, and we take less pleasure in the world around us. If we stop playing, we stop developing as human beings. And he uses the story of the sea squirt, a microorganism that lives in oceans, to tell that story. Brown goes so far as to saying when we stop playing, we start dying, because when sea squirts become fixed, when they stop innovating, that's when they die. Play is also important for our relationships and our community. I'd like to share a personal story from my congregation that I have worked with that demonstrates the power of play for people in communities. One member of the congregation wrote this to me. I'm thinking back to our recent governance committee meetings at our church. I've sat on this board for about 50 years, and I've served as its chair 4 times over the course of that. At times, I have come to meetings with my head filled with anxiety over issues or possible conflicts. I have always loved this work and my church, but sometimes governing can be difficult. When Carrie first introduced play at the beginning of a meeting, I was a bit puzzled and apprehensive. But, and she put that in capitals, but, I was amazed at the difference it made to the tone of the meeting, and especially to my personal approach and headspace. I could literally feel the tension leaving my mind and my body. I no longer dreaded the direction that some agenda items might take. I no longer anticipated a confrontation with a particular board member. I truly felt relaxed and had faith that we, with God's help, sorry, I had a tickle. I truly felt relaxed and had faith that we, with God's help, would be led in the right direction for the good of our church and our congregation. Rather than looking at those meetings as something to dread and regretting that I had agreed to lead, I now look forward to these meetings as a highlight in my life. I think this person feels this way because play is at the heart of all personal relationships, person to person and human to divine. Play is not simply fun. Play represents an attunement to the environment, to other people, and even to ourselves, freeing us intellectually and emotionally to unleash energy that is already present within us and the world around us. One of the delights of playing with others, playing in community, is its lingering effects. It opens us to the other, it builds connection, and the positive feelings associated with someone we have played with influence how we interact with them at other times. Johan Ozinga, an anthropologist, suggests that the community built while playing extends itself beyond the time and space of the play activity, making the sense of community permanent. The feeling of being apart together, of sharing of magic that lasts beyond the moment. And it is this feeling that colors all future interaction with the other players. Play creates bonding opportunities, and attunes us to another, which helps us to develop emotional maturity and self-regulation, leading to healthier relationships. Play also enables cooperation and collaboration, and it heightens our enjoyments of others in life. It allows us to learn about ourselves and other people, and it is essential for developing trust, empathy, care for the other, love, fairness, sharing, and other positive characteristics. Perhaps you learned these lessons in your own early play lives. As a sacred activity, play naturally contributes to the well-being of the group, but in some other way and by some other means than the acquisition of the necessities of life. Play is important developmentally for cognition, emotion, and sociability, but it is also important spiritually, and we will explore that in our next video. Before we do that, let's take a little look at play and anthropology and play and health, and I will share some of my own thoughts on play after all the research that I have done over the last few years. One of the gurus in the study of play is Johann Huizinga. He wrote Homo Ludens, a study of the play element in culture. Huizinga posits that human beings are Homo Ludens, beings at play, rather than Homo sapiens, beings with knowledge or who can reason, or Homo faber, beings that make things. He says that civilization arises and unfolds as play, and that human beings have been created to play, and play is a distinct and important factor in the world's lives and doings. Unlike Brown, Huizinga says play is not a biological function, but rather a cultural one. And when creating a thick description, we honor a variety of approaches and understandings of play. So Huizinga approaches the study of play historically, not scientifically, and he does so because he envisions play as something beyond a physiological, biological, or psychological phenomenon. Play incorporates the new and the innovative with current structures and patterns, and allows for mistakes and previously unimagined ways forward. We need creativity in play, supported by collaboration and transparency for innovation and invention. Moving back to Brown, we see that his research also suggests that play can make us healthier. Those who continue to play throughout life demonstrate fewer cases of dementia, reduced neurological problems, and reduction in heart disease and other illnesses typically related to old age. This suggests that play improves the overall health of the human body and not just of the brain. In 2013, the United Methodist Church General Board of Pension and Health Benefits did a survey, and that survey showed that 51% of the 1,600 pastors they surveyed struggled with high cholesterol. 47% experienced hostility in the church environment, 40% were obese, 39% were overweight, 35% had high blood pressure, 28% had arthritis, lupus, or fibromyalgia, 26% had difficulty working, taking care of things, or getting along with others, and 17% were asthmatic. It would seem, based on science alone, that we ought to prioritize play, particularly as ministers. And that study also found that men were at particular risk of heart disease and women for joint and muscular diseases. These results are similar to research done by Duke University and the Clergy Health Initiative, which determined that clergy suffer from depression at twice the national level. Jaakko Hammond points out the obvious, saying that these statistics do not paint a life-giving image of being in ministry, and that all of these are generally at a higher rate than the general population. When Brown was asked if play by itself has the potential for easing stress, he concluded that some evidence in the literature about human play says it does, and that his own work with high-risk violent offenders reinforces this conclusion. In light of the research by Stuart Brown and others around human physical, emotional, and spiritual health, it seems obvious to me that ministers need to play more. But there are also theological reasons to play, and we'll explore those in the next video. And so after all of this, you may realize that we still have not defined play. Huizinga summarizes his thinking about play as follows. He said play is a free activity standing quite consciously outside ordinary life, as being not serious, but at the same time, absorbing the player intensely and utterly. It is an activity connected with no material interest, and no profit can be gained from it. It proceeds within its own boundaries of time and space, according to fixed rules and in an orderly manner. It promotes the formation of social groupings which tend to surround themselves with secrecy and to stress their difference from the common world by disguise or other means. As noted earlier, Brown claims play as a biological state in which we are freed from ourselves, from anxiety, in which we find pleasure and meaning. Gordon Burkhart claims play is an evolutionary process and that it is more easily identified in animals, but he still notes the following characteristics of play: that it is done for no apparent reason, that it is repetitive, spontaneous, an activity that we engage in when we are not under stress, and it is often an exaggerated task or activity. Rather than enter into a list of play definitions, I've summarized their thinking in a PowerPoint that I have sent to you. Please reference this for clearer definitions of play. Instead, I want to share with you my beginning thoughts on play. As I work through figuring out just what I mean about play, Brown's identification of it as a biological state grounds my thinking. This new discovery allows me to integrate two previous ways of thinking about play, as a playful attitude, playfulness, and the actual practice of playing. A complete definition of play is challenging since play is as unique as each one who plays. My first thoughts on these qualities and values of play are outlined here, and these will form the basis of my own articulation of play for the thesis. But I am really interested in discovering together what we come up with as some characteristics or a way of expressing just what play is in terms of liturgy and ministry. I believe that humans are created with the capacity, the desire, and the impulse to play, and that play somehow allows us to enter into thin spaces and opens the possibility for holy encounters. Thin spaces are difficult to define, and while they may be geographical, such as pilgrimage sites and sanctuaries, mystical locales, they are also spiritual. These physical and mystical spaces allow for the distance between heaven and earth, between the sacred and the secular, to collapse, and we are able to catch glimpses of the divine, glimpses of the transcendent, and feel moments when we are out of ourselves or out of time and space. They allow for holy encounters, moments that take our breath away, moments that draw us closer to God or to another person, moments that stir a physical response like chills or goosebumps or a particularly strong emotional response, moments that take our breath away or give us a deep sense of awe. I also believe that play creates liminal moments, those times when we lose ourselves in an activity and forget about time and free ourselves from the limits of the physical space that we inhabit. I believe that play offers Sabbath and renewal and open space for the sacred to be recognized or felt. Play encompasses those activities that free us from time and space, that bring joy and satisfaction, things that renew our relationships, our spirits, and our bodies. And these are unique to each individual, but they're not only individual experiences, they're shared experiences as well. I also very much believe in a God who is playful, who has created us in God's image, thereby endowing us with playfulness. I don't think that play needs any kind of justification, although we often believe as this were true. Too often, the play we engage in becomes work. There's a sense that play comes after work, duty and responsibility, rather than as a natural part of who we have been created to be. Play can become work when we push ourselves past the point of enjoyment, engage in play for pay, or pay others to play on our behalf. Play is also an attitude that we adopt. And as an attitude, play looks at life imaginatively, with a sense of opportunity, openness, and possibility. In this way, play is transformative for both individuals and groups, and it allows for both structure and freedom. And so in this way, it's similar to the United Church of Canada's principle of ordered liberty. There are things that bind us, but there is also freedom within that. While Brown determines that play must be purposeless, I have a tendency to disagree. I believe that playing with a purpose can still be transformational, liminal, freeing, and joyful. And this idea is born out of my experiences with clergy and with youth and young adults who enter play reluctantly in a worship or workshop setting, or even at the beginning of a meeting. Play that has been designed to compel their participation for a particular purpose, whether that's community building, instruction, reflection, whatever. Youth and young adult ministry regularly employs experiential learning through this kind of play that is prescribed and yet still somehow transformative. Kevin Johnson proposes that play is phenomenologically complete in itself, which is more in my line of thinking than what Brown had to say. Play can be described as a set of activities or practices that occur in the interstices between freedom and structure, the space in between the subjective and the objective, between creation and imitation. This feels like a good beginning place for defining play. Humans are innately playful, and to live our lives playfully is, I believe, a response to Deus Ludens, a God who plays. I think of play as providing a capacity for surprise and delight, and it allows for the possibility of recreation and renewal, enlivens life and ministry, and opens space for the sacred. I believe that play is both a gift of God and a requirement for living life abundant. So why play? It's a question I get often asked. Why not? It's fun. My observations of adults who embrace fully their inherent play nature are that it assures a better quality of life. It decreases stress. It connects them better with their particular communities. It keeps them optimistic in a very changing, challenging, and demanding world. It fosters empathy, and it makes sense to include it in our lives. As a physician, Brown has come to see it from many years of scientific exploration as a public health necessity from birth to death. Sadly, he says, for the majority of adults, this sense of its loss as compared to when they were kids is pervasive, and play is not considered a hallmark of adulthood. Sure, there are great emotional, physical, communal, and spiritual reasons for us to play, but the simple truth is, it's fun to do, and it brings community and deepens our relationships, and those are no small matters. So get out and play.